Okay, welcome back everyone. We aim in the next 3/4 of an hour to get through some of the big challenges that I think we all face in trying to expand internationally. And with me I've got 4 guys who are going to help us through and navigate with some practical understanding of what those challenges are. So we've got Julien from Made, we've got Matt from Lovehoney, we've got Geoff from Wiggle and Chain Reaction, and we've got Robin from Isobar. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and talk a tiny bit about their business and the key challenges they face. And then we'll start opening out to questions, and I'll ask them questions if you don't have any. So, but I'd like to see them from yourselves. So would you like to start, Julie?
Yes, sure. Hi. In very short, so I'm Julien. I'm one of the founders of a company called Made.com, which is an online furniture brand. I ran their operation for 4 years on then international expansion. In a few words, Made is, so we launched in the UK, we stayed in the UK for 3 years, we're now in 8 countries, 400 people, turning over 100 million pounds of revenue. And our main challenge, I would say that our main challenge today in expanding is that even though we could be seen as a global business, let's say European business, but like a global business at some point, I would call ourselves a multi-local business, meaning that we need to be local in every country. I touched base on that just like this morning in another session. The second challenge that brings is when you want to expand quickly, but you need to be local in several countries, there is a very fine balance to find between what do you need to localize and what do you need to manage centrally. Advertisement, logistics, HR, spend on everything. That I would say would be the key thing.
Right, hi. I am Matt from Lovehoney. If you don't know what Lovehoney do, haha. We are the UK's largest online retailer of sex toys. Potentially the world's eventually. That's the plan. Our biggest we have 2 biggest challenges. Firstly is how do we manage the customer experience and the fulfillment experience for countries that we do not dispatch from? So for example, if we are dispatching into Canada where we don't have a warehouse, what is that like for a customer, and how do we make that as good as possible? And then secondly, instilling a culture of talking about local, international. So people tend to treat the US as one big country. It is not. Someone in Minneapolis doesn't act the same way as someone in San Francisco. And how do you reflect that, not only in your marketing campaigns, but also in your site content, your delivery promise, all that sort of thing? That's my big challenge at the moment.
Hello, I'm Geoff. I'm from Wiggle and Chain Reaction Cycles. We are an online retailer of cycling and sporting goods. We sell into about 76 countries. We've got about 20 focus countries. And we run pretty much everything from the UK. We've got a few people based out in Sydney. And that's great because it means you can get everyone around the table and you can make decisions and you can do stuff at scale around the world. But actually gaining insight and having a really good ear on the ground is really hard when you do that. It's all a trade-off, but that's the thing we always wrestle with.
Yeah, I'm Robin. I'm an architect from Isobar. So we work with a number of different brands. The examples include Asda, Adidas, Clarins, etc. So we have a bunch of brands who are multinational players and have sites all around the world. We also have brands that are just in the UK and are looking to expand for the first time. We have brands that are kind of in between. So the challenges that we tend to deal with are those customers that are expanding into weird and esoteric brands, so places like United Arab Emirates, Russia, China, that all have their own unique challenges. But we also have brands who need to assess how they get off the ground running. So we help them decide on a proposition in first market and things like that.
Okay, so would anybody like to ask the panel some questions just to start with, or should I start the ball rolling over here? Microphone? Or is this? Do I have to give this one? Is this the only microphone in the room? I'll be the
Thanks. So I would like to understand how you decided which country to go into first, how long you gave yourselves to enter that market, and what you decided your MVP would be, your minimum viable product to go into that country. And then also, did you make the right decision with that country in hindsight?
Should I start? Because we are not multi-country, so we had the question. So it's a very good question, because it took us 3 years to go abroad, but we raised funds on the paper. So since day one, we had investors asking us when and where we would go next, and they wanted us to go very quickly, and we said no, we're not ready. From day one, we had on the paper things like the US, India, China, Brazil, France, blah blah blah. So at the end of the day, it's not that complicated. On the paper, it seems like you can do everything. When you start running your business, you can't do anything because you don't have time. So you refocus. So you forget the exotic countries, and we forgot the exotic countries like India, China, Brazil. The US has always been on the map somewhere, and it comes back and it goes away because we have more opportunity in Europe. And then you focus on Europe, and then we went like, so which are the main markets in Europe? We are in the UK already, so we still have France and Germany, and we were 3 French funders, and France is 2 hours drive, Eurostar from London, and that was as simple as that. So that was the good choice. And we did the same for Netherlands, and we did the same for Germany. If you want to take, and I think the only time we made a different choice, because we thought we had a great deal on the table, is when we launched in Italy, we launched in Italy too early, because we had an amazing media deal on the table where we could trade like bit of the business against great media, and we're like, we have that deal, we need to do that. It's not the most obvious country, but let's do it. Didn't work that well, just because it was not the right rationale.
Yeah, that's very good. Matt, you're...
From our side, yeah. So obviously at the very beginning you do the obvious thing, where are we currently get most of our traffic from? That doesn't work. So then we started having metrics like search demand for core terms in that territory. What are CPCs like, which will then give you an indicator of how competitive it is. What does the product tailoring required? Because I don't know about other industries, but in the sex toy industry, different territories have very different requirements. In terms of being burnt, I would say Germany burnt us. Germany e-commerce is weird to begin with. Weird payment methods, weird privacy stuff, but what we didn't understand was the competitive marketplace, essentially. So you think, well, it's a massive mature market, we can have a slice of that pie. No, there are some really big players, it's incredibly fractured. We don't really know what we're doing there. And so we still are in Germany a niche player. We attract the visitors in Germany because we stock things that other retailers in Germany don't. It's going to be a focus for us. Essentially Europe for us is going to be getting our ducks in order and doing it properly. But we thought we could just barge on in because we know what we're doing, and it turned out we didn't.
Really honest. Very
good. So I actually don't know what the first country was. That was a little bit before my time. But the approach we take now is very much in the same mold. So we have started from a strong UK position where we've kind of said, right, if the range is good for the UK, we've got great pricing, we've got the brands people are interested in, we've kind of take a really iterative approach to it. So the first stage would be just to open up delivery routes into Europe, into other English language countries, and then actually to begin to allow demand to come through. And we picked up quite a lot of walk-up traffic effectively in that way. So to give you a feel for that, we've got 76 countries that we actively deliver to, but only 20 of those countries we actively market in, and we really, really focus on. So for the rest of those countries, we're allowing walk-up sales. So we're getting stuff off content and a little bit of organic search, and we're kind of happy just to let that happen. There's a really low marginal cost to that if we've set up our delivery contracts so that we can just take those sales and process them. And then what we'll do is we'll regularly comb back through that list and kind of go, okay, what looks like the next opportunities? So we run run lists of opportunities that are kind of queued up for expansion into search marketing, expansion into affiliates, expansion into Google Shopping, expansion into display, and we kind of work through those opportunities, and that has worked really, really well. But the thing that it's rested on is a really solid and well-invested UK proposition. And when if that's not really there, it's kind of hard to have that kind of emergent strategy for international.
Yeah, it's really good. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So what the guys just said all makes a lot of sense to me. That all lines up with what we've seen. I think, Matt, your point in particular about don't just go into a market because you're getting lots of visits because you ship there already. If you're going into a mature market, it's mature for a reason. If you're selling a product that other people already sell, then you're going to get, how are you going to beat that local market that's already established? If you're selling something that those markets don't sell, then you've maybe got some wiggle room there. But I think starting from an MVP approach and building up to tiers of different international sites, so you can start with shipping, you can then start with launching dedicated sites either as a cluster or as individuals, and you can start to tailor which features you can pull off locally from the UK and which features you need to then move across to that local marketplace to get a competitive advantage.
Yeah. So I think across the piece, lots of people in the past have talked about the prospect of almost strategically approaching markets and kind of going, these ones have to be personalized, everything's got to be personalized. These ones, well, I can kind of get away with just doing a bit of currency, and these ones I'll just shove a website out there. I think a lot of what you're saying is that might be conceptually a good place to start, but the reality is that you really need to think about each one.
If you can hunt it down, ASOS have a really good model for doing this, which we have nicked wholesale, where it's a 4-tier model, where at the top end you've got your flagship sites, and then essentially they have almost like graceful degradation. Where essentially they've stripped everything down. So at the very base level, right, do you offer a delivery service to that country? Next level, right, do you have a localized landing page for that country? So if you look at ASOS South Korea, essentially they have a landing page translated saying, right, here's how you shop on ASOS in a different language. And then they've just like slowly added services on top until you have the all sing all dancing, let's do a TV campaign type stuff. If you can find it, it's brilliant, nick it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Any more questions? Oh.
Hi there. Just a quick question. When you're expanding into international markets, what percentage do you keep aside for managing returns? Because that could be a really big challenge when expanding in any new territory.
Yeah. Does anyone want to talk about returns? And
I can talk about it a bit. So we have really different returns rates, and Germany for us is the country with the highest return rates, and it can be anything between a third to 50% of items get sent back. It's just the way people shop. And particularly mail order or online, people want to, with clothing products, particularly sports goods, where you're really, really interested in the fit of a jersey or some bib shorts, then in some countries that is just the way people want to shop. We just manage it in our sort of P&Ls and our approach to how much we can spend on marketing or how much margin we're looking to make out of a project. So we can't really do anything about it. It's kind of the way people will behave. So we try and structure the business in that country around it. It might mean you can't afford to do certain activity in that country. But, for example, Germany is currently one of our fastest growing countries. So by kind of going with the way customers want to shop and trying to fit ourselves to behave in that market, we're able to offer them something useful.
Yeah. We work with Speedo, and they find, again, being a sports clothing retailer, sizing doesn't work the same way as traditional retail. So they see a high number of returns both in the UK and in the international markets they work in. But I think when you're kind of planning going into an international market, that's a data point you can get as returns, but make sure you're getting it relevant to your industry. Because obviously, clothing versus appliances, they're all going to be different return levels. And the other factor, if you're taking an international strategy, is making sure that you're doing it in such a way that you can pull back from a market if needed. So we have client who recently pulled out of Sweden because they're just not seeing the volume to justify having a dedicated translated site. So they've rolled that back to just shipping only. And if they weren't seeing enough trade then they could roll that back further to not offering that market anything at all.
Yeah, and I think what you're suggesting, Geoff, is very important as well, in that what you're talking about is almost building a business model by each territory, and therefore determining your activity in that marketplace depends upon that business model.
Yeah.
And as we know, I did some work for Max, who unfortunately have gone bust since we did some work for them. But very much that German model, I mean, you'd really ask whether or not you wanted to invest in it. The fact that they were in there and had such a brand reputation was another matter, and they wanted to be there, and they had stores and wanted to support it, but the business model looked awful. So you do almost need to work your marketing activity and the amount that you can spend to service that market by that business model and the margin you can get out of it. Okay?
Just to add, I would totally agree on the fact that it does depend on your industry. On that relates to the two questions, this one and the one before. So when you look at a market, you need to look at your relevance in that market, not only whether it's big or not. I mean, Germany is working well for us. Could have worked really bad, and we've procrastinated. And I think it's working well because customers are waiting for our items. There is a demand. On the other side, when we looked at Germany, we looked at return rates, and we were like, shit, Zalando is like, it's having 3 times higher return rates in Germany than in the UK. 30%, 10%. I don't know whether the figure is right, but it's like big. On what's going to be happening for us? And we launched on the return rate the return rate in Germany is the same as in the UK. So then you need to understand why. It actually makes a lot of sense from our industry perspective, because that they understood. I kind of understood the German market the day one of my German friends commented on my question. I was like, "You guys are crazy. You send every item back. You buy stuff you don't want to pay for them. You want me to invoice you and to pay 30 days and you actually you return everything." And she was like, "You didn't get it. We don't buy online. We order online. We receive everything, we choose, and we buy at the door." So they actually order an assortment. I'm being very caricatural, but that's kind of it. They order an assortment, you choose what you want, and you send the rest back, and you pay afterwards. But you don't do that for furniture. You don't order 3 sofas. And that explains, I think, the difference.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we've touched on a point. I think, Julien, you were talking about some of the territories that you found most difficult, and we've touched on Germany, which is always a different marketplace in terms of payments and expectations of returns, etc. Are there any others that anybody would like to share as being some of the most troublesome or difficult markets to break into?
I don't know. I mean, China, of course, is, if you look at the Lovehoney China website, it looks like no other Lovehoney website in existence. There is such a massive cultural difference, and of course legally there's all sorts of hoops you need to jump through in order to trade, but a slice of that Singles Day pie is worth so much money that you just want to be able to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody?
Another market we found really tricky is America. So it's definitely like the largest sportswear, apparel, sporting goods market in the world, in terms of and certainly in terms of the amount individual consumers will spend. And so you look at it from one perspective and kind of go, well, okay, it's massive. We can there's all sorts of angles we can go in there. The way pricing works in America is kind of odd. The way competitors work in America is a bit different to the UK. So there's some natural advantages, but it's really expensive from a paid search perspective. And that's one of the thinking about that grade of how you get into a country and scale. Paid search plays a really important role relatively early on, unless you're going to go and make a massive brand investment. And it's kind of interesting on Wiggle and CRC, on Chain Reaction Cycles, they went brand first. So they went and sponsored some massive events in California, ran loads of advertising in magazines and built a brand. But that's a big leap, and it's slightly less iterative than the historical Wiggle approach, which would be like, let's run some paid ads in California and see what happens. And Wiggle's approach didn't work quite so well, and Chain Reaction's approach, because they were bold, built a business that's about 3 times the size as the Wiggle business. And it's really interesting. It's size of prize in terms of revenue can be very different to size of prize in terms of profitability or ability to compete.
Certainly for the US, for us, we were entering a very mature market with a handful of massive competitors. We originally went down the organic route, so most of our SEO efforts were on making sure we were ranking for our top terms. In the US, that got us a lot of the initial growth. Being number 1 for sex toys was a godsend, quite frankly. We worked hard for that. And then we just went after those competitors with paid, with a ruthless vengeance. And that's where most of our money was spent.
Very good. Okay. Sort of the back end of that question is that exiting, when do you feel, and have you pulled out of any markets? When do you feel you've judged it to be the wrong time to be in there, etc.? Is there any advice you could give in terms of exiting any markets that you've trialed in? Anyone?
Well, I mean, I would say if it's not costing you, and the customer experience is okay, be a niche retailer. It's fine. If it is a negative customer experience, if you can't fix that, I would say stop, because you're not going to get your reputation back otherwise. But when you're looking at cost, think about the actual cost of running that site, because it's not just the physical site, it's all your merchandisers, the analysts. Everyone forgets that some poor guy has to be running analytics on this tiny little site that takes just as long as all the other sites to do that job. So think about all the little jobs. In Lovehoney, we can pretty much just press a button and that will create a clone of any site if we want to enter a new territory. But it's all the merchandising, creative, translation, all the overheads of running that site. Is that actually worth it? Because those costs really stack up.
It's the real net margin rather than just the sort of
just
gross.
The product cost. Yeah.
And that's where having a tiered approach can be really helpful as well, because rather than each of those tiers is going to increase the amount of costs you're putting into the business. So if you take that tiered approach with how you roll the markets back, you don't necessarily have to turn them off completely and stop trading in that country. You can just take it back a tier and maybe wait until it is the right time to press that market a bit more.
I think it's really interesting, and I totally agree. And I think we've looked at things in a similar way. And there's a step we've also done kind of before we've kind of got to that point, and before a country's got so small that you're starting to talk about like the cost of keeping it running. And that's kind of like a portfolio view of your marketing investment. So we try not to do it too much, because it can be quite constraining. Because if you're constantly saying, I make more money in France than Ireland, you may never grow Ireland. And it might be like that America example from before. You have to commit. But we find it's really useful to periodically do a P&L review at a country level that kind of says, how much margin do we make? How much money are we spending on marketing? What's that return rate like, for example? Some of those big variables. So that at least you know where you are on the relative return for your marketing investment by country. And that can really help you kind of like shape stuff into, okay, these are the good countries that are growing fast. We make decent margin and we should keep pushing harder on marketing. These are the countries where actually it looks quite inefficient, and we need to then start to make a conscious choice about, do you dial back that investment or not?
That's fine.
Same.
It's okay. The same. Superb. Now, I'm going to ask this question because I know you want to answer this question, Matt. You want to answer this question, don't you? Okay. By any chance, have you considered some of the HR policy issues that affect internationalization? By any chance, just on the train or whatever?
Just as a proviso, they send you the questions in advance, and there was a HR question I had no idea on the answer on. So I emailed the head of HR at Lovehoney, who wrote me like a massive document about all the issues that she faces running international HR. I had no idea it was so complex. Her biggest thing is maintaining equality, or the perception of equality. So we have three essentially offices. So we obviously have Bath in the UK, we have Atlanta in the US, and we have Brisbane in Australia. And then we have satellite offices, so an office in Toronto, office in Paris. And the issue is, of course, the local laws to some extent. So in the UK, you can have sick days. In the US, you have 5. In Australia, you have 10 personal leave days per year. So then how do you make... We're really transparent about like salary and benefits at Lovehoney, so how do you make that appear equal to people? And then you also have to then remain competitive in that marketplace. You know, I want someone good in the Brisbane office. So if I'm having to pay more there, and then someone in customer service in Bath finds out that, it's like, so it's getting our staff to understand the actual worth of their overall package. I mean, in the UK, we generally don't offer medical insurance, but it's common in the US. So trying to get our staff members to understand the overall value of what they're getting and how that is actually equal across territories, that is the hardest job.
That's really interesting, and again, it plays back into this. You need to look at the proper margin and the proper cost in each. You need to run those P&Ls and make sure that you've got everything accounted in them. Fantastic. I've deflected away from the audience for a couple of times. We've got a question at the back. Oh, we've got one here. Fantastic.
Yeah, it was where you're selling, not localizing pricing, so you're using your UK price, selling outside the EU. Do you still sell Inc. VAT and take the extra margin, or do you actually sell at the ex VAT price? I know it's a very detailed question, but I'm just interested in, or are you always doing it in local currency?
Where possible, Inc. VAT and take the margin. if I'm honest, that was. I mean, mostly we sell in the local currency, but the way that we're structured, so we actually have like a LHEU, which is a Eurozone site, but it mostly services Ireland and Finland for some reason. But we will try. Obviously, we need to remain competitive. So if necessary, we will lower the prices specifically for that territory, but generally we'll do Inc. VAT.
That's an interesting point on how you set your price for the product in different markets as well. We had a retailer who was just shipping to different markets. They hadn't launched an international site yet. We're looking to launch in Australia. And because of the overheads of them wanting to have a local presence to support that launch, they were looking to actually adjust their prices up. So customers who had been shopping with them prior were getting things cheaper after exchange rates than they would be once they launched a local market. So they just ended up pissing off a load of their customers. The other thing that's going to start to impact customers in the EU soon is there's new legislation coming in about geo-blocking. So right now, if I try and hit the UK site from, say, France, or the big one is France and Belgium, because often you get different prices there, but you've got, for half of the population of Belgium, you're seeing the same language that you speak, so it works really well. You won't be able to do that anymore. You will have to give the same offer across the EU so that anybody could shop from any of your sites. So that's going to have an interesting impact on some people.
Okay. I think there's a gentleman over here.
Hi. Yeah, so there's a question about when you might want to set up a legal entity in a country, if the country is maybe big enough for you, or if there's advantages maybe not to have a legal entity there for any reason. Particularly thinking of the US, for example.
I don't know the answer to that one. We have a legal entity in the US.
Yeah, not something we normally cover.
Yeah.
No, I don't think we do. I'm not for that. Sorry.
I mean, we on our side, we're not in the US, so I can't comment on this point. But usually, the bigger thing is for us was the day we had teams on the ground, we needed to have a legal entity. And then which one you choose is makes the difference. But if it's really a question of choice, and I'm not talking of like your admin on your fiscal situation and everything for the company. It's just like if you can keep it simple, usually what companies do is they don't set a legal entity because it's more complicated to manage. And at some point you're like, should I still not have people on the ground and not have an official showroom because otherwise you will need to have a legal entity? Shit, no. Okay, I'll set up a business, I'll set up a team there, I'll be officially there. Oh, it's going to be more admin on more consolidation, but that's the thing.
Okay. Any? Oh.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the diversity. My question is, when you enter a new market or when you're considering entering a new market, do you do consumer behavior research or do you do competitors' patterns of behavior? Say, for example, the gentleman on the very left was talking about a high rate of returns. And it reminded me of people, going into, say, for example, Tesco, trying a few items, then putting them back on the shelf, and so on and so on. So I was thinking, could the customers be using your platform in the same way that they would use the let's walk into a shop? So are we considering both what's happening in the competition, say, for example, with the high returns with Zappos or with Amazon? You can return anything, and that's their selling point. So are we considering what the competitors in the particular market do and what the particular local behavior, consumer behavior is like? Thank you.
So we do that, particularly around things like delivery and product promotion. So those two things we find need to be localized quite heavily. So we will review and benchmark competitor delivery propositions, so free delivery thresholds or delivery costs or delivery time or local delivery providers. And we find that's incredibly important. We kind of put delivery as a foundation stone for international success within a country. So it's a really important step to get right. And for example, we talked a bit about in Germany how people like to pay on the doorstep. For our customers, we found that it's about 40% of their online shopping goes through that kind of method. We don't offer that at the moment in Germany, but we're really interested in doing that because we just can't serve those customers who wish to shop that way at the moment. So we look at it as it's a major friction point. If you don't get that right, you're kind of irrelevant to people if it doesn't really sit against the competition. The other, what we don't really go out and do lots of insight-based research. That's actually relatively expensive for us in our particular situation compared to just trying stuff out. So in Japan, we sell an awful lot of wheels, and we sell a few brands that are difficult to get in Japan. They're really interested in the Italian brands. And actually, we just kind of follow the data. So by looking at what people are browsing and buying, what people talk about on content, on blogs and that kind of stuff, you just get a sense for what that market's interested in. So if you visit our Japanese website, it really is pivoted towards being a wheels and accessories site. If you look at our UK website, at certain points through the year, it feels like a clothing website. So we've kind of got quite a broad range across like 3 major sporting areas, and we will flex that to the country that we're trying to talk to.
It's certainly something we look at when we're helping a retailer decide which market they're going to move into. We can, there's data that's available for things like conversion rates, purchase rates, payment types, how many people use those payment types. All that data can be gathered for a particular region, just like it can for the UK. And we also do competitor analysis, so looking within that particular vertical, what features are common on the site, what do we see compared to what they have on their UK market today. So we do that kind of analysis for a client. But what we also find is that a lot of what you might see as truisms from that data don't prove out when they then go into the market. So an example would be, we had a client go into Denmark, and I think it's the ideal payment. We were, the data was telling us you have to have that, but we found that actually it ends up being a bit like PayPal in the UK, is that people prefer it, but if you've got credit debit card, people just use credit debit card. Very few people will not make a purchase just because you don't have PayPal. They would rather use it. So that's the kind of features that we find in the detail, rather than if you just try and do that big data. A lot of this you're not going to find until you bite the bullet and go into the market ultimately.
And that's exactly the same in Australia with ZipPay. So you don't have to have ZipPay in Australia. It just kind of helps you a little bit. But certainly from a delivery point of view, it's slightly bad. But Australian e-commerce seems a couple of years behind everywhere else. And so literally entering Australia with a same day dispatch was uncommon in Australia when we entered there, which is just so we went into Australia saying, right, we do same day dispatch and we can get it to you next day even if you're in Perth. and that just blows the minds of Australian, because it just didn't exist when we entered, and now we're the number one sex toy retailer in Australia. So just by going in with a delivery proposition that is just so far beyond what they're expecting, but perfectly normal in the UK, has just allowed us to steal so much market share.
I think what you've both talked on there is, I think we all have a proposition, and we all start with a proposition, and we all kind of go, well, can I make that work? Does that square with this market? Well, you really, really need to be thinking about that as well. And it's not that you want to fundamentally address or change your proposition away from what you are, but you might want to alter it, as you're saying. Maybe I'm a wheels business in Japan and I'm a clothing business in the UK, or in terms of its emphasis, that really needs some thinking about as well, because that, again, couldn't be the key to the margin that you need to be able to operate in that country and do all the marketing and so on and so forth. Okay. Some hands going up.
Hi. There's obviously been a lot of market information about the bricks moving towards clicks and clicks moving towards bricks, and everyone's sort of got their sort of half-hearted chance in testing the market and testing. But one of the common things we hear is that if a retailer does actually have a physical location in a particular region, it does benefit online sales. So when you go to international, is it something you actively look for, or is there a sort of breakpoint that says we definitely need a physical store to extend our brand or extend our experience? Thank you.
So we were a pure online retailer when we launched, and I spent 2 years emailing customers telling them that they would never have a showroom because that was too expensive for them, email by email. And then we kind of figured out that even though we were selling a lot of big items without a showroom, we might be not that smart, and we might be missing that share of the population who would never buy without a showroom. Small story is that when we launched our French showroom, I had that older lady knocking at the door at 8 a.m. on the launch date with a picture of a sofa, and she was like, I've been waiting for 2 years. Do you have it there? We didn't have it. She bought something anyway. It's reassurance. So we launched in the UK in 2012, our showroom in September, and we had no clue whether it would work or not. It's the only board decision we had to vote for in the life of the business, because it was important but not enough to require everybody, and we had no clue. I think it's one of the best decisions we made, by the way. It might be very specific to us because we're a furniture brand and we're a brand. So we're not selling other people's stuff. So I don't know whether Zalando needs showrooms. It's more complicated for them, I guess. For us, if you have never bought a May.com item, or if your neighbor doesn't have it, it's the only way to see where there is good quality. So we launched it, and then we won't dig into that, but there is no very precise way to know whether it's profitable or not. You can't attribute an ROI. You will attribute some sales, but you might have got them anyway without the showroom, or you will miss some other sales, but you have ways of like looking at conversion rate increase in the area and everything. Then when we launch new countries, you have two approaches. Either you're like, we're launching in France, and for the moment we don't launch with a showroom because it's very expensive. That's quite a big bet. And I'm going to do that only when I see that the country is taking off, and now it's going to add a lot of value. So that was the first approach. But now the approach we have is actually the showroom adds so much value that it's going to help the country take off. And especially when you have no brand in a country, that's when you need to have a showroom. Doesn't mean you need to have 10 showrooms. But it's easy to answer the question for us in France because Paris is 50% of the business. In Amsterdam, that's quite big. Germany is a bit of a debate because you don't know where to place your showroom, or you need to have more. But I would definitely, if you're our kind of business, selling in limited quantity of country, or needing to build a brand, I would definitely launch it this way. You figure out a business. Our business is e-commerce website, offline and online advertisement, showroom branding. That's the ecosystem. Just replicate it.
We're probably in the situation you were several years ago, saying we'll never have shops, we'll never have shops, we'll never have shops. Maybe we'll have a shop. For us, I'm kind of, if you're going into the US, what is the point to having a shop in New York for a customer in Orlando, or Chicago or Tallahassee or whatever. I think if we ever had physical presences, it would be for PR purposes only. Because lazy journalists, they don't want to leave London. They're certainly not going to come to Bath. We would have a presence purely so we can get journos in and they can play with the fun stuff, but probably not an actual physical proper shop.
But in effect, what you're saying is you're using it for branding.
Yeah.
It's a branding tool. It's not.
Very much so.
It's not a store, as in we would expect it to do a return on footfall and so on and so forth.
I think I've worked in lots of online businesses that have had store parts of them, that kind of stuff. So I'm definitely a fan of stores, and I think there's loads you can do with it. But I think the thing you got to do is ask what the opportunity is in the market. And I think the Australian example for Lovehoney is really good. If you can say, I'll ship to Perth next day, then that, if that's what consumers want in that marketplace, that choice, your price competitiveness, the convenience of being able to order with you and then have it tomorrow, that might be the best thing to do next. And maybe the store comes a year or two down the line. So I think that's the way we would always look at it. We have one store in Belfast, which we've had for a very, very long time. And we don't really, on the plan at the moment, the kind of things we've got, which are kind of like commitment level investments, where you've got to do something and hang on to it for a couple of years before you really get a payback. The things on that list are things like improving distribution and speeding up delivery times and big brand campaigns so we can go and build a brand, or starting physical events so people can come and meet us and experience doing a sporting event with us. And I think stores definitely live on that spectrum, but they do actually feel, for us, quite far down the line, because it feels like there are some investments you can make that actually touch lots of customers in a country, like a brand campaign or like a big distribution change.
We certainly haven't found, with the work that we've done with the brands, that there is a market where, you definitely have to have a store to be able to launch and operate online properly in that market. But, if we're working with a brand and they already operate stores in a particular market, it's highly likely that when we come to the end of our research, that's the market we're going to end up recommending, because you're getting free marketing, essentially, and you're getting public awareness that you're just not getting in those other markets where you haven't established.
Okay, I think we're getting towards the end. Maybe room for one more. Anybody? Did I see a hand at the back? No. Oh, right. Okay.
I think it was Alex mentioned geo-blocking, and I'm just interested in pragmatically how he would recommend solving that, because if you've got a customer coming from Sweden and you have a Swedish krona site, you want to render a Swedish krona version of the site. If you've got from Germany, you want it in euros and in German. That's going to default through geo-IP, but if how far to meet the requirements of this geo-blocking legislation, do you actually, how obvious do you have to make it that people can navigate to alternative pricing, etc.? Because it sounds like it could be a complete nightmare to me.
Yeah, so that's a fair question. From what I've seen of the legislation, it doesn't say that you can't recommend a customer direct elsewhere. The important piece is the blocking, so you can't stop a customer accessing the site. So you should still be able to redirect, as long as they can still ultimately get to, if in your example, if they're in Sweden, they can still get to the German site should they choose. But there are many retailers now who take what I consider kind of hard geolocation redirection, which is you redirect automatically and you don't give any option, versus those that do there's a couple of ways, a softer approach. You can redirect and then allow the customer to navigate themselves, or you can throw up an overlay that suggests, why don't you try our local site that's more suited for you. So you can still totally do those other two methods, you just can't block a customer from accessing your offer.
We literally do an overlay that says, hey, we think you're from this country, this site is better for you, and here's a 10% discount.
Yeah.
Works really well.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I don't know about you guys. I think we should both thank them, and also maybe what we should do is hire these guys out as a international rescue for anybody's e-commerce business and expansion. I'm sure they'd come up with some great solutions for you and guide you on your way. Anyway, thank you ever so much, guys, and thank you. Thanks for your questions.